Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. And thank you to the Alameda County Clean Water Program for having me or for having us. Today, we're going to talk about soil basics. So what we're going to go over today is I'll give you an introduction to the Our Water, Our World program. We'll talk about watersheds and water quality. I'll give you a introduction to the principles of integrated pest management and how they are going to help us have a healthy, happy garden. We'll talk soil basics, what healthy soil can do for your garden, and how do we get that healthy soil. A little bit about buying soil, big picture about the climate, and then we'll have resources and Q&A at the end. First, what is the Alameda County-wide Clean Water Program? The program works to protect the Alameda County creeks, wetlands, and bay from runoff that may carry pollutants into the waterways. And related to gardening, that means avoiding chemicals that can be washed off the lawn and garden and into storm drains by irrigation and rain. So you can sign up to get their newsletter. If you go to the cleanwaterprogram.org, on the right-hand side, you'll be able to sign up for the newsletter with news, events, clean water tips. And that's cleanwaterprogram.org. And you'll be able to hear about upcoming webinars like this one. And Suzanne and I have done lots of webinars for the Alameda Clean Water Program, and they are all located on the YouTube channel for the program. So if you go to YouTube and search Clean Water Program Alameda County, or you can reach the YouTube channel through the cleanwaterprogram.org website. And you can view all of our past webinars, gardening for good bugs, water-wise gardening, veggie gardening, weeds most recently, and several other topics that we've covered. Because we're not going to cover everything today. There might be something that we talk about that piques your interest and you want to learn more about. So you can go there to find some more information. And now for those of you who aren't familiar with the Our Water, Our World program, the Our Water, Our World program, it's designed to bring awareness between pesticides and water quality and provides pest problem solving education. You can find the Our Water, Our World program in over 200 hardware stores and nurseries in over 23 counties. So we're in the Bay Area and the greater Bay Area as well, all the way down to Fresno and all the way up to Ukiah and many counties in between. We partner with retailers to provide information for the associates and for the customers. So in each store, what you might find is an information rack with information sheets, like on the left-hand side, left-hand picture. So that is information for you to take on common pest problems like ants, aphids, and then how to grow a healthy lawn and roses as well. And then also in stores, you will see many stores have these blue tags located on the shelves that highlight the eco-friendly products on the shelf. So you can see in the middle and the top right. And some stores also have QR code posters where you can just scan those codes and then pull up the fact sheets right on your phone. We also have the Our Water, Our World website, ourwaterourworld.org, for all of those fact sheets and more information on less toxic products. So why are we talking about pesticides? Why are we talking about water quality? We talk about these things because we all live in a watershed. And if you live in the Bay Area, you live in a massive watershed called the San Francisco Bay Watershed. Half of all water that lands on the state of California, either in rain or snow, drains into the bay. So all of that, as it moves through the cities, towns, rural areas towards the bay, it picks up a lot of materials on the way. Because when we're doing things out in the yard, out on the street, those storm drains at the street level have a direct connection to our waterways. So there is no, in most counties, the water that enters a storm drain goes directly to a waterway, a creek, a river, and then the bay and ocean. So we really want to be conscious about what we're doing out in the world, and understand that we do have a direct effect on waterways. And that can be pesticides, which we'll talk about today, or a little bit about today, but also fertilizer, washing your car, walking your dog, any litter as well, all goes to the storm drains. And then to avoid using pesticides and the more toxic ones, we like to talk about integrated pest management at our Water Our World. So this is what we practice here. Integrated pest management is a science-based approach, and it's a decision-making process. We like to look at the garden. We're talking about soil today, so we'll focus on the garden. We do talk about the home and other places as well where pests can arrive. But we like to look at the garden as a whole, more holistically. So we're not just focusing on the problem and finding a quick solution. We're taking a step back, we're understanding the problem, because a lot of times when we see what we think is a problem is really a symptom of a different problem. So we really want to figure out what's really happening. And we want to ask ourselves a few questions like, can we live with it? Some problems can be short-lived, or they don't really cause that much damage. So maybe they're more of a nuisance, and maybe, you know, they're not causing too much issues with our plants. So maybe we can just ignore it, do a minimal amount of control and let it go. It'll go away on its own. But there's times when that's not true. So the steps for integrated pest management are: prevention is number one. We like to really focus on prevention. There's a lot of things we can do. We can set in place before pests arrive to prevent them from even coming or prevent them from causing a lot of damage. Then there's identification. We want to identify the problem, what's really going on there. And if we do have a pest, so if it's an insect, a mammal, a rodent, a weed, we want to identify what it really is, what it actually is. This is going to give us better understanding of how to take action, how to deal with it, the timing, the best mode of action, and we are understanding the life cycle so that we can get it at the optimal, most efficient time. So when we take action in integrated pest management, there are 4 kinds of action steps called controls. There's cultural controls, which is really bolstering the health of the garden. We're going to talk a lot about that today. And then it's also, cultural controls is also kind of, it's changing the environment so that we're really supporting the plants in the garden that we really want there. And we're making it a less desirable environment for pests. Then there's mechanical controls, which are physical things that we can use to reduce and prevent pests. So traps, barriers, screens on windows, row cover, gopher baskets, all barriers, and then tools like our weeding tools, our line trimmers, our mowers. Then there's biological controls, which is really about understanding that our garden is an ecosystem and there's both good and bad in the garden. Not all bugs are bad. 90% of the bugs in the garden are actually good bugs. So we want to do what we can to support them because they help us in lots of our pest management. And that's not just the bugs. There's also birds, lizards, snakes, hawks, owls, bats, lots of other critters out there that are helping us keep pest problems down. So we want to make sure that we are aware of them and we can support them so that they can help us. And then lastly are chemical controls, which are pesticides. And those are always going to be a last resort in integrated pest management. We're going to try all the other types of controls. And if there's still problems, we can decide not to go for the pesticides. That is a perfectly fine thing to do. If we don't choose to do that, what we can do is maybe, you know what, if that plant is just unhappy, we've tried all the cultural, mechanical, and biological controls we know of, and it's still struggling, let's just take that plant out. Let's give ourselves permission to do that. But if we do want to try for chemical controls, we're going to go for the least toxic option, most eco-friendly. We're going to use it sparingly according to the label and very carefully. But what we're going to talk about today is mostly cultural controls, because again, we want to bolster the health of the garden, make the garden a really good space for our plants, a really healthy environment for our plants, and a less desirable place for pests. Because when we have healthy plants, we're going to be reducing pest problems. Pests really like unhealthy, stressed out plants. But if we start with the soil and we build up healthy plants through the soil, we're going to just automatically have way fewer pest problems. And if there are some pest problems that do arrive, our healthy plants will be able to fight off those infestations. Healthy soil will lead to healthy plants and less pests. So that's what we're talking about today. First, let's talk about what is soil. Seems like a basic question, but you know what? Can be quite confusing sometimes. So let's talk, what is soil made out of? Soil is made out of 25% air, 25% water, about 45% mineral particles, and then about 5% organic matter. Now, those percentages, of course, change depending on the health and type of the soil, but those are the general idea. And that 5% organic matter really does change a lot. So at 5% is kind of a generous average for good soil. Good soil can, 10% organic matter is really healthy soil. That percentage can go up to 15 to 20% organic matter, but after that percentage, the benefits of the organic matter kind of decline. So we want to really keep it in that 5 to 10% range. That's going to be what we can usually achieve, and it's going to be very beneficial for our plants. And then soil texture. This is the question that you might be asked at a nursery. What kind of soil do you have? Do you have sandy soil? Sandy soil has large particles that you can see and big pore spaces where air and water can move through quickly. So water moves through it very quickly, and so with the water, so do nutrients. But water can infiltrate quickly as well. Then you might have clay soil, which are super microscopic, tiny particles. They're often kind of flat, so they tightly pack, stack on top of each other. There's very little space in between them for air and water to infiltrate. So if you have clay soil, you might notice it's very hard to get a shovel in there. When you water, the water kind of sits there and very slowly sinks in. That's usually what happens when you have clay. And these are all good things to know for watering, for other things, for planting as well. And then you might have something right in the middle or somewhere between, or a mix of all three. So somewhere in between is silt. Silt is medium-sized particles and medium-sized pore spaces. And you might have a mixture of all three. There's an easy way to figure out what you might have. I would recommend going to YouTube and searching the soil jar test. That's a way to look it up. You just take a jar about half full of soil from your garden, add water to the top, shake it up really well, and then let it sit for about 24 hours. That sand is going to drop to the bottom, and then that silt will be on top of the sand. After it settles, the clay will be a fine layer right on top, and then the organic matter is going to either float to the top of the water or kind of just float around in the water and maybe land a little bit on top of the clay. But you'll be able to see layers pretty clearly if you give it enough time to sit still and settle, and then you'll be able to see how much of each you have. And it's actually a good idea to check multiple parts of your yard, because different parts of your yard might have different kinds of soil. So now you can't change your soil texture, but what you can do is you can change your soil structure. And what soil structure is how all of these components, those 4 components that I mentioned, how are they put together? How are they assembled? Are they tightly packed and smushed together and hard to break open? Or are they like that picture on the right, That's a beautiful example of beautiful, good soil structure. But you can see in that picture, there are clumps that are holding together nicely, which is what you want, but there are still lots of pore spaces that allow for roots, air, and water to infiltrate. But you can tell it holds, when you lift it out of the ground, it holds together a little bit, but it's also crumbly, so you can kind of loosen it up easily with your fingers, and you can see those roots are holding on. And yeah, those little clumps, they're called aggregates. There's lots of nice aggregates, but still there's space in between. That's an example of good soil structure. So again, you can't change your soil texture. If you have very sandy soil, you'll always have sandy soil, but that's okay. We'll figure out we'll talk about how to manage that. But what you can do is change your soil structure, and you're going to do that in a lot of ways, but the main way to do that is by adding organic matter. And we're going to expand on that in the next few slides. So another element, really important element to soil, especially that organic matter component to our soil, is the living organisms in the soil. Those living organisms, the fungus, bacteria, and vertebrates that are moving through our soil, that goes into they make up part of the organic matter. Both the living and those dead organisms are that organic matter. We really want to encourage that life in the soil. Living soil with a lot of life in it is healthy soil. What living organisms in the soil can do for you, they break down organic matter. So when you're adding fertilizer or compost, or leaves are leaves are landing on your soil, they're breaking down that organic matter. What they do, they chew it up, they break it down, and they turn it into a form in which plants can take up. It's just like what happens in our guts. The gut microbiome chews up the food that we eat and delivers it to us in a form that we can take up. The soil plants cannot live without those soil organisms, just like we cannot live without our gut microbiome. It's the same thing. Living organisms can also store nutrients. So maybe the plants aren't ready for certain nutrients, so they're going to store it and wait and hold on to it until those plants are ready. Living organisms also break down toxins and pollutants in the soil, and they create like a kind of a sticky component to the soil. Their excrement, their spit, all the stuff their bodies, like the fungal hyphae, all of those things create kind of a stickiness to the soil, and they hold that soil together, which is really important. We want soil to be held together in nice aggregates and not loose and crumbly, blowing away, rushing away with water. So, and then another way, a reason we want to really focus on the soil health is because it's going to really help us with watering. So we live in a summer dry climate. We get sometimes we get heavy rains in the winter, but we usually only get rain a small amount of the year. So we want to allow all of the water that we get to infiltrate our soil, move through the soil, stay in the soil, so that it's available to those plants for those long, dry summer months, or these days it's almost all year round, but those long, dry summer months, we want water to be available to our plants so that they can continue to grow and have that water access. So we want to focus on soil health to make this happen, because good soil structure, again, those nice aggregates with pore spaces, will allow for good water infiltration. This will allow, when we do have heavy rains or rain at all, that water is going to be able to enter into the soil at a good speed so that it can avoid this pooling, like in this bottom photo. We don't want that pooling to happen. We want soil to move through and not rush off either. So we want to enter the soil, and then we want it to move through the soil at a speed that is not too fast, so it's not taking the nutrients away, but it can kind of be held in the soil. So, and healthy soil will also hold that water like a sponge. So again, we want that healthy soil to hold that water spread it throughout the whole soil area so that it's being held there and available to plants for a longer period of time. So again, we're going to focus on healthy soil for the overall health of our garden. Plants that have consistent food and consistent water throughout the year will be less stressed and healthier. And again, healthy plants are less attractive to pests, and they can defend against infestations if they do arrive. So now we know all the benefits of healthy soil. How do we get it? I'm sure that's what you're all wondering. So what we're going to talk about next is using compost, using organic fertilizers. We're going to protect the soil with mulch. We're going to keep living roots in the soil. We're going to allow for water infiltration, avoiding pesticides, and supporting life and diversity both above and below the soil. So compost is a wonderful thing. We should be first on our list when we're talking about healthy soil, because this compost is organic matter. That 5% organic matter that we were talking about, compost is 100% organic matter. So when we're adding it to our soil, we're boosting that number up. And again, compost is organic matter that has been decomposed by bacteria, fungus, microbes, worms, and other decomposers. So adding compost to our soil will improve our soil structure. As I said, we have sandy soil, we have clay soil. We can't really change the texture that we have, but we can do is add organic material, which is going to improve the soil structure. When we add compost to sandy soil, it glues those sandy particles together and forms aggregates so it can hold on to water instead of water rushing right through. If we add compost to clay soil, it infiltrates those particles, it breaks them up and allows for more air and water pore spaces in that soil. Compost is great for water retention. Again, we're turning our soil into a sponge. Compost can hold 5 times its weight in water. So we want to add that compost to really add that spongy, sticky quality to our soil. Compost is chock full of microbiology. All those decomposers that were breaking down that organic matter are still in it. So when we add compost to our soil, we're adding life to our soil. Compost is amazing for balancing pH levels as well. If you have acidic soil, but you want to make it more neutral, add compost. And then it recycles nutrients. Of course, it's taking those plants, the food that you're eating, all those, the yard waste, it turns it back into nutrients that can be reused by your plants. And it reduces the need for chemical fertilizers and pesticides when we're using compost for supplying an array of nutrients to our plants. And we're building that healthy soil, again, healthy plants, less pesticides. And compost actually is pretty amazing at fighting pathogens and bad bacteria in the soil. So it does have pest management qualities in its own. And how do we use compost? There's a few ways to apply it. If you are preparing your beds for planting, which I'm sure many of you are, it's a great time to add compost before you plant. If you can, add it 1 to 2 weeks before planting. That'll just get that microbiology active and settled into that soil before you plant. But you know what? If you are planting tomorrow and you didn't add your compost, that's fine. Just add it anyway. It's not the worst thing either at all. So amend your beds with compost before you plant. Really what we're doing, again, focus on that 5 to 10% organic matter. So if you have a raised bed, think of that in percentages. You're really only adding 1, maybe 2 inches of compost to the top layer and then mixing it in, because we're not planting directly in compost. We're not filling half of our beds with compost. We're really just adding 5 to 10% organic matter. If you have existing plantings that you don't want to dig up, but you do want to give them some nice healthy microbiology and nutrients with that compost, you can definitely do that. You can top dress. So that means you just put the compost on top of the soil around existing plantings. We're keeping it away from the stems or the trunks of any plants. We're going to keep it, we're going to more put it under the drip line, under where the branches are. And then we can either gently dig it in or we're going to water it in. You can also put compost underneath mulch. So if you're adding a nice fresh layer of mulch, compost first, then mulch, and then water it in. You can also make a compost tea, which is kind of what it sounds like. It's compost, usually soaked in some sort of bag or sock in water. And what's amazing about compost tea is that it's a great soil inoculation. So really adding that microbiology and back into your soil. It's a great way to do that. It's a liquid fertilizer, so it's lots of nutrients in a liquid form, making it easy for your plants to take up. And then you can also use compost tea as a foliar spray, which means that it goes on the surface of the leaves, and it can actually have a lot of pest repelling or pest prevention qualities to it when you add it, when you spray it on the leaves. I do recommend looking up a little bit more, doing some research on compost tea before you make it. There are some good things to note about aeration and how long it sits, and the type of water you're using. I recommend looking it up a little bit before you dive into that. And another thing you can use in addition to compost is organic fertilizers. And what I'm really stressing here is we want to use organic fertilizers. Organics are derived from organic matter, such as mushrooms, manure, compost, kelp, bone and blood meal, and they're not derived from fossil fuels like many synthetic fertilizers are. Those three numbers on the front of our fertilizer container are NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. They tend to have lower numbers. That does not mean they have less nutrients in them. It's just they're just not as overly strong, which is fine. We don't need that. And they also, because they come from organic materials, they contain micronutrients. So they have more than just NPK. They also have magnesium, boron, lots of other micronutrients that will benefit your plants. And organic fertilizers are released slowly to your plants, which is going to allow for sustained, hardy growth as opposed to really fast, but not sustainable growth. So let's look a little bit more on the, the differences between organic versus synthetic. As I said, organic fertilizers feed the soil microbiology. We're feeding the soil, and then the soil microbiology is taking those nutrients and offering it to the plants. There really is a dialogue going on down there, believe it or not, between the microbiology and the plants. The plants ask for nutrients and water when they need it, and the microbiology supplies it. So the plants are getting what they need when they need it. Organic fertilizer will increase the soil health. It prevents growth spurts. We don't want growth spurts. We just want sustainable growth, consistent growth. It's going to be sustainable food, staying in the soil for long periods. Organic fertilizer doesn't run off into local waterways and cause problems. And it's also nearly impossible to burn your plant with organic fertilizer because, again, we're feeding the soil, and the plants are then getting what they want when they want it. Burning your plant happens when the plant gets too much nutrients when it didn't ask for it. It is more economical. At first, it might look more expensive. The price tag on the boxes might be more than your synthetic counterpart, but in the long run, it is more economical. You don't need to use as much organic fertilizer over time. They're made from natural materials, plants or animals, or they're byproducts of existing processes, and they're renewable sources. Whereas synthetic fertilizers will feed the plant directly, which is, believe it or not what we want. And it's going to make your plant reliant on it. So you're going to have to consistently always be feeding that plant. We like to compare synthetic fertilizers to either like Red Bull or steroids. They get dependent on it. It stimulates a lot of new growth, a lot of energy, right, real quick, and then a crash where it needs more. So it stimulates lots of new growth, which might sound good, but new growth a lot at a time can stress out the plant, inviting pests, and new growth really attracts pests. Pests love that new fresh growth. So if there's a lot being pushed, you're going to attract a lot of pests. Synthetic fertilizers are also high in salts, which over time can harm your soils. Synthetic fertilizers, when in runoff, can contaminate waterways, cause problems like algae blooms. You can burn your plant if you apply too much, and often synthetic fertilizers are manufactured from chemical industrial processes and fossil fuels. Again, just a quick picture to show organic fertilizers are feeding the soil, chemical fertilizers feed the plant. All right, another way to build that healthy soil is with mulch. Now, what is mulch? It's any material spread over the soil surface as a covering. So this could be anything really that you choose to put on your soil surface. But what we want to focus on are the organic materials. So you can use oyster shells, gravel, rubber, but those aren't going to give you as many of the benefits that the bark, wood chips, leaves, straw, lawn clippings, organic materials can offer your soil. So mulch has lots of benefits. So we are going to, mulch is going to be a nice protective layer on your soil. So it protects it from compaction, wind, sun, it can from harsh rains, it can protect it. It's like a nice layer of insulation. So it conserves water by reducing evaporation, keeping that harsh sun off the soil surface. Will keep that water in the soil. It's going to improve water infiltration. Sometimes water has trouble infiltrating a hard soil surface. So having that layer of mulch on top will allow it to infiltrate easier. It keeps soil cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter, which our plants do appreciate. Plants don't like really intense temperature swings. So if we can insulate that soil and keep it regulated, it's going to keep our plant roots regulated as well. As organic mulches break down, they do feed soil organisms. They keep weeds from sprouting and growing. Again, that protective layer, keeping the sun away from germinating our weed seeds. That's going to help us with weeds. It creates habitat for beneficial insects. Sometimes they like that chunky bark to make little homes in. And again, it reduces soil compaction and erosion by acting as a protective layer. And I do want to mention two important things to remember when we're talking about mulch. One is to never put it around the crown of the plant. So again, that crown is where the above ground parts and the below ground parts meet, right at the soil surface. So we are going to keep that area free of mulch, depending on the size of the plant. It could be a few inches, or it could be a few feet or a foot away from that crown. We don't want to crowd the crown of the plant, because that can invite fungal diseases and a lot of moisture buildup, which can cause rot and other problems. Another thing to bring up when we're talking about mulch is that if you are in a fire-prone area, you do want to keep your first 5 feet away from your house free of all organic materials, and that includes mulch and plants. So that's the area, that 5 feet around your house, that's the area to use your pea gravel or your stone walkway. And then beyond 5 feet, then you can start using mulch. There's also different kinds of mulch that are recommended for fire-prone areas and some to avoid. That gorilla hair is kind of fine and flaky, very easy to catch on fire, so avoiding that one. And then more of a composted thick bark mulch is going to be much less hazardous. There is more information on CAL FIRE that you can look up about this. One other thing to mention about mulch, if you do get a large delivery of mulch, you might get an arborist that drops a bunch in your driveway. That's fantastic. That's a great way to get it. If you don't use that mulch right away on day one and you still have a pile in your driveway, tarp it, because we don't want the mulch to blow off or run off into the waterways or into the storm drain, because it can cause blockages and problems with this in the storm drains and the sewer. Sheet mulching is a great way to build healthy soil. It can also be a great way to get rid of a lawn or a large area of weeds, or just a large area of your yard that just the soil is just not good, not really ready for planting. Sheet mulching is great for all of these things. And what sheet mulching is really several layers of cardboard on top of the soil surface, and then several layers or several inches of mulch, that woody material or any kind of organic mulch on top of that cardboard. It's a great option, alternative really to landscape fabric as well, which can cause problems in the future as it breaks down. Landscape fabric is not advisable. Cardboard is a great way, and it's much more economical. You can usually get it for free from neighbors on Nextdoor, Craigslist. So what we're going to do is we're going to, again, you can leave the weeds or the lawn or whatever's there. You can leave it in place. If they're really like tough weeds, I would try to remove them, or you can just cut them down. And then you can put compost on the soil surface. That's a great way, again, to regenerate that soil if you choose. Then you're going to put 3 to 4 layers of cardboard overlapping really well over the compost or directly onto the lawn, however you're doing it. And then on top of that cardboard, then you're going to add 3 to 4 inches of mulch. Now, it's important that if you have irrigation or sprinkler heads, you mark where they are because you don't want to bury them. And then you are able to plant right into the sheet mulching. If you're redoing an area and you want plants already, that's fine. Cut out holes in that cardboard and plant directly down into that soil. You do want to try to use, 1 gallon size or larger when you're planting into sheet mulching, just because the soil surface raises up so much when you're adding the cardboard and the mulch that smaller than gallon sizes will kind of get lost and smothered in that that material. So that gallon size is going to be a little bit taller, higher up, so it's not going to get smothered by all the mulch. And again, we're keeping that mulch away from the crown of those plants that you're planting. And I forgot to mention, as the cardboard and the mulch, let's go back, as the cardboard and the mulch breaks down, it's helping build that healthy soil. It's also helping with evaporation, water holding capacity. All of those benefits are happening under that sheet mulching. Another great way to help your soil and build that healthy soil, keep your soil covered, and add nutrients and microbes to your soil, is to use cover crops. Cover crops are kind of, I don't want to say cheap, but they're lower cost plants because they don't usually result in like a crop like fava beans, vetch, clovers, cowpeas, soybean, or annual ryegrass are just some of the examples of cover crops. They're a great thing to add to beds that you're not actively using. You can add them to beds you are actively using as well. They will help grow right alongside veggies. Cover crops, when you're planting them, they're gonna grow, and what they're doing is they're putting down living roots in the soil. They're having that relationship with the microbiology, taking nutrients, giving sugars, growing, helping that microbiology build up in that soil. Many cover crops like the fava beans, like legumes like fava beans and soybeans, actually add nitrogen to the soil. They have nodules on their roots that put nitrogen into the soil. So great thing to do between growing veggies. We'll add that back to the soil. Also, if you're not actively growing, many of these cover crops have beautiful flowers that beneficials really like. So especially in the winter, when there's less flowers blooming, those cover crops can offer food for those beneficials, keep those beneficials fed year round. And then leaving those roots in the soil is going to improve your soil structure. It's going to improve water holding capacity. It's really important with all the things that we're talking about. Having soil covered is really important. Soil doesn't like to be bare. When soil is bare, it's left to the elements. The sun bakes down on it. It can make a hard crust, which will then make water harder to infiltrate. Wind comes and will just blow that dry, dusty soil away, or a big rainstorm comes and just moves that soil away. We really want soil covered to protect from all of these elements. And it's going to help with, water holding capacity, water evaporation as well, and all these other benefits. Having living roots in the soil as often as possible is going to continue to feed soil microbes over time and add to that soil structure, add to the organic material in the soil. With cover crops, also on that note, it is advisable that when you are ready to get rid of them, again, they don't really, you can eat parts of fava beans. Of course, you can have the beans. The tips of the plant actually make a really lovely addition to salads. So you can harvest parts of these plants, but most of the time people don't really eat them. They're just great for helping their soil and then adding to their compost pile at the end. It's recommended that you cut these down instead of pulling them out, because again, you want to keep the soil undisturbed and keep those roots in the soil. Cut them down at the base. For fava beans, it's recommended that you cut them down before they make beans. You can let a few of them go to seed and make the actual bean pod so that you can use those beans next year. But it's recommended that you cut them down before that stage, because that's going to be the most benefit for your soil. The most nitrogen is going into your soil at that point. So just cut them down at the base, and then you can chop up all the tops of that cover crop, put them in your compost pile, or you can use it as a green mulch. And then another way, again, as mentioned, having living roots in the soil is going to be always beneficial. So another way to do that is to plant perennials. Of course, we love our annuals, we love our vegetables, but if we can incorporate perennials into our gardens, they're going to have a really wonderful benefit to our soil and to our garden. It's living roots in the soil all year round, holding that soil in place. They protect the soil from heavy rain and wind. Larger plants will shade out soil to reduce evaporation and reduce weed germination. Flowers all year round will provide birds and bugs, food for birds and bugs throughout the year. It is recommended that you choose California natives or Mediterranean plants that are going to be suited for our summer dry climate, with perennials especially, because they're going to only get rain part of the year, and they're going to need maybe some watering in the summer, but we want to be able to have them be low water or drought tolerant to survive our drier summers. Makes it easier on us if they're prepared to do that. We always want to match plants to the condition of the garden. Study your yard. Your yard has different microclimates. Everyone's yard has different microclimates within it. So study where you're planting, how much sun, is it shady, windy, a slope, low, is there like a lot of moisture in the soil? Really study it and make sure that you're matching the plant to that environment, because if you put a plant that's going to be unhappy in that environment there, it's always going to be unhappy, it's going to be stressed, it's going to invite a lot of pest problems. And another way to benefit the soil is focusing on the hardscaping, actually, believe it or not, in your garden. And when I say hardscaping, I do recommend using permeable surfaces where you're putting in walkways and pathways. So that could be decomposed granite, bricks, pea gravel, things that water can infiltrate when we do have rain or when you're watering, because when water can infiltrate down, it's supplying, it's just more water to infiltrate the soil and to be available to your plants. And we want to keep as much water on site as possible and not having it running off into sidewalks or streets or the storm drains. So you can do all these things to build your own healthy soil, but you know, sometimes we're working with containers or raised beds, or we just have terrible soil to start with, so we want to buy some soil. Perfectly wonderful option, and there are lots of wonderful retailers in Alameda County that have great options. So when you are buying soil, just a few terms to understand. If you're planting directly into the ground, that is fine to buy soil to add to that area. What you're looking for is a planting mix or garden soil. And you want to mix this in 50-50 with your existing soil. The planting mixes and garden soil will contain a lot of organic material to mix in with your existing mineral material. And it's going to also have ingredients in it that will break up hard soil and improve drainage. If you're working in raised bed or containers, you're going to buy a potting mix, or sometimes there's raised bed mix now. Those are soils that are basically all the soil components in one. Because that's all your plants are going to get is what's in that container. So there's organic material, there's mineral material, there's ingredients in there that add aeration, increase water holding capacity, build structure, and have nutrients. Now, it is a good idea to, when you're like each season, to refresh your soil. And that doesn't mean to dump it all out and throw it away and get a new bag. All that means is, you know, organic matter, of course, breaks down. Those nutrients are used up by our plants. So what you want to do is refresh that soil with worm castings, compost, organic fertilizers to really add back those nutrients after year, especially with high feeding things like veggies. And then, yeah, when you're repotting, it's also good with, you know, every year, annually, you can consider repotting your container plants with either in a bigger pot with fresh soil or in the same pot with fresh soil or compost, etc. So I hope now with all those tips, you understand that healthy soil will lead to healthy plants and less pests. And now I just want to say something before we close and offer resources. I just want to give a bigger picture perspective to the soil, to soil. So because healthy soil is also a climate solution. So when I was talking about what's happening underneath the soil, that conversation between microbiology and the plants, that relationship is vital for healthy soil and for carbon drawdown. So during the process of photosynthesis, plants are pulling carbon out of the air. They're feeding that carbon down into the soil to the microbiology. Microbiology is eating that carbon, those sugars that the plants are producing, and in return, they provide the plant nutrients. But when that process of pumping those carbon down into the soil to feed the microbiology, that's carbon drawdown. And then when we are not disturbing the soil, we're keeping that life in that soil, we're keeping our soil healthy, we're basically keeping that carbon down in the soil and we're sequestering it there, which is what we want to do. So the more photosynthesis that we can promote, the more life in the soil is going to lead to more carbon drawdown and more carbon sequestration. We're also, when we're focusing on healthy soil, we are reducing the use of chemical inputs made from fossil fuels. We're not using chemical fertilizers and we're not using chemical pesticides. We are also building resilience against drought and flood. When we are turning our soil into a sponge, it's going to be, and it has really great holding capacity, water holding capacity, that's going to make it resilient against drought. And when it has great infiltration, good soil structure, that means that when really heavy rains and floods come, that water can infiltrate quickly and go into the soil and not run off and cause major issues, flooding issues. With that resilience, we're protecting against soil desertification and erosion. The more sticky and sponge-like and healthy our soil is, that soil is going to stay where it is. It's not going to dry out. It's not going to blow away. It's not going to be pulled off with wind or water. And it's going to stay where it is, which is what we want. And then, of course, we can reduce stormwater runoff because because we're reducing runoff by having that water infiltrate, and healthy soil does filter out pollution as it moves, as water moves through the soil. Carbon-rich soil. So carbon-rich soil will filter out pollution. For an example, Brita filter, like that water filter that you put in that you have in your fridge that filters the water. Those filters are made of carbon. And so exactly what's happening in that Brita filter happens in our nice carbon-rich soil, our healthy, organic, material-filled soil. It's filtering out pollution. So just a few things to think about. And some more online resources for you. We have our ourwhaterourworld.org, and we have a healthy garden handout that I highly recommend, talking about really good plants to plant, how to build our healthy soil, how to prepare our gardens to be as healthy as possible. And with that, I want to thank you. Thank you to the Clean Water Program of Alameda County. Thank you all for being here and for having me today. And we'll go for questions.